The happiest little town in all of cartoons is named after a real place on Earth where, between 1946 and 1958, the United States set off 67 nuclear bombs. That part is completely true, and it is only the beginning. For more than 20 years, SpongeBob SquarePants has been hiding things in plain sight. Some of them are real and can be proven, frozen right there in the animation. A shirt drawn backwards for a whole episode. A birthday that should be impossible. Episodes quietly locked away forever. Others are pure invention, dreamed up by fans who could never stop hunting for secrets inside a sunny little cartoon about a sponge. We are going through 10 of them, the genuine mistakes and the famous theories, separating what is true from what was only ever a story. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get into it. The town built on a real place. Somewhere near the bottom of the ocean sits a small town full of bright colors and cheerful music. A yellow sponge wakes up there every morning, hops out of bed inside a pineapple, and heads off to work flipping burgers with a smile that almost never fades. The town is called Bikini Bottom. It has a school, a handful of houses, a busy little restaurant, and a sandy road where 3 of the oddest neighbors on television live right next to each other. For more than 20 years, this town has felt like one of the safest and silliest places in all of cartoons. The sun always comes back, the music stays happy, the burgers always get made. The name of that cheerful town, though, comes from a real place on the map, and the real place carries a story far heavier than anything the show has ever put on screen. Far out in the Pacific Ocean, about halfway between Hawaii and the lands near Australia, there is a ring of tiny islands wrapped around a calm pool of water. The ring is part of a larger group of islands called the Marshall Islands. People lived on that ring for a very long time. Families fished in the water, grew food on the land, and raised their children the same way their parents and grandparents had before them. It was a quiet home, far from the noise of the rest of the world. The ring had a name that countless people have heard without ever knowing where it came from. The name was Bikini. After the Second World War ended, that quiet came to a stop. The United States had gained control over that part of the ocean, and the leaders of the time were searching for an empty, faraway spot to test powerful new weapons. The ring of islands looked perfect to them, mostly because it sat so far from any large city. The families who lived there were told they would have to leave for a while. They were promised they could come home once the testing was finished. Around 160 people packed up their whole lives and were carried away to a different island, trusting that the promise would be kept. The promise was not kept. The new island where the families were sent could not grow enough food, and the people there began to go hungry. Years later, some of them were finally allowed back to their old home, only to be moved away again because the land and the food grown on it still held too much of the poison the bombs had left behind. A home that had belonged to one group of people for hundreds of years slowly slipped out of their hands forever. The testing itself is hard to imagine. Between 1946 and 1958, the United States set off 67 nuclear bombs on and around those islands. 67. Some were dropped from planes. Some were placed on old warships left floating in the water like targets. One of them, set off in 1954, was so strong that it stunned even the scientists who had built it. People later worked out that this single blast was around 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that had been dropped on the city of Hiroshima years before. The explosions threw sand, water, and a fine dust high into the sky, and that dust carried an invisible danger with it, a kind of poison called radiation that does not wash away with rain or fade away with time. The water and the soil were left unsafe in a way that will last for thousands of years. That is the real history behind the word bikini. It is a true story and a sad one. Every part of it can be checked in history books, in old government records, and in the memories of the families who lived through it. There is nothing made up about it at all. Now back to the cartoon. The little town at the bottom of the sea is called Bikini Bottom, which is a playful way of saying the floor of the water beneath that same ring of islands. The two names line up because the show sits, in its own silly way, right below the real spot where all of that testing once happened. The man who created the show understood the ocean far better than most people who draw cartoons ever will. His name was Steven Hillenburg, and before he ever drew a single talking sponge, studying sea life was his actual day job. He had gone to school for it, and afterward, he worked at an ocean teaching center in California, leading tours and helping visitors understand the small creatures that live close to the shore. He loved tide pools most of all. Those are the little puddles left sitting in the rocks when the sea pulls back, and they are packed with strange and wonderful living things. He cared about the ocean so deeply that back in the late 1980s, he made a small comic book to teach children about it. it, a comic he called The Intertidal Zone, and one of the characters in it was an early, simpler version of a sponge. Steven Hillenburg later went back to school again, this time to learn how to make cartoons, and he carried his love of the sea along with him. He worked on another animated show first, and then began building a world of his own. He filled that world with real types of ocean creatures, only kinder and funnier than the real things. A sponge, a starfish, a crab, a squirrel who travels down from the land, a tiny one-celled creature so small that, out in the real ocean, it drifts along unseen. Even the grumpy neighbor counts as a quiet little fact, because although his name sounds like the word squid, Hillenburg said the character is actually meant to be an octopus, given fewer arms simply to make him easier to draw. The show first aired in 1999. Hillenburg himself once figured it might only last a single season and gather a small group of fans. Instead, it became one of the most popular cartoons ever made, loved by children and grown-ups alike. He kept helping guide it for years, until he became very ill and passed away in 2018 at the age of 57. The town he built lives on long after him. Before any of the strange theories ever started, those are the plain facts. A real place with a real and painful past. A real scientist who loved the sea more than almost anything. A cartoon town named after that real place, made by that real scientist, and filled with real kinds of animals drawn in the goofiest way possible. This is the point where the true facts and the guesses begin to pull apart. Fans who learned about the testing at the real bikini started to look at the cartoon through new eyes. The link felt too tidy to be an accident. The show is set directly under a spot where enormous bombs went off, and the water there was left full of an invisible poison. So a question slowly took shape in people's minds. What if the creatures in Bikini Bottom are not ordinary sea animals at all? What if the blasts changed them somehow? Maybe the reason a sponge can talk, walk, build a house, and hold down a job is that something in that poisoned water reshaped him along with everyone he knows. The fans built this idea up piece by piece, and it is easy to understand why so many people latched onto it. A sponge in real life is a simple thing that sits stuck to the seafloor and cannot move around on its own. The sponge in the show drives a boat, plays music through his nose, and cooks in a busy kitchen. A starfish in real life has no brain at all. The starfish in the show talks, naps under a rock, and tags along on adventures. Some fans even looked at the squirrel, who walks around underwater inside a glass helmet and a special suit, and tied her to the animals that were sometimes kept aboard the test ships during those years. Lined up next to the real history, each odd little detail seemed to hum the same quiet, gloomy idea. Maybe these creatures carry the marks of something terrible that once happened in the water above them. None of that lining up makes the idea true. The history is rock solid. The bombs, the dates, the families forced from their home, the hunger, the poison left behind, all of it truly happened. The name of the cartoon town really does match the name of the real place. Those parts can be trusted completely, without any doubt. The jump from there, the belief that the characters are creatures twisted by radiation, is a fan theory and nothing more than that. The people who actually made the show have answered the question directly more than once, and they have said the characters were never meant to be damaged or changed by any bomb. The yellow sponge was built to be sweet, hopeful, and a little bit innocent inside a world of grouchier neighbors. The whole show was made to be funny and to share one man's love of the ocean, not to bury a secret warning about weapons beneath all the jokes and the laughter. There is one more true piece to add, and it is a real one rather than a guess. A researcher at a university who studies the Marshall Islands and their history has noticed that small pieces of the real bikini story do quietly turn up in the show every now and then, in ways that most people watching would never spot. These are not loud lessons aimed at the audience. They are faint echoes, tucked here and there. Whether those echoes were placed on purpose or simply slipped in by chance is something nobody can prove for certain. What stays clear is that the real history and the cartoon share more than just a borrowed name, even though the wilder mutation theory falls apart the moment it is pressed. So the safest, silliest town in all of cartoons turns out to rest on top of a real place with a heavy past. That single fact is what gives the whole show a slightly different weight once a person knows it. The bright colors stay just as bright, the happy music plays on, the burgers keep getting made, and the sun keeps coming back. Sitting underneath all of it, though, is the quiet truth that the name was taken from a corner of the world that paid a terribly real price, and that a gentle man who loved the sea took that same name and turned it into a home for the cheeriest character on television. That is the ground ground the entire show stands on. A real place, a real person, and a tall pile of fan guesses stacked on top of both. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The oddest things hidden inside this cartoon are not all found in history books or fan forums, though. Some of them are frozen right there in the drawings, in single flickering moments that pass by far too fast to catch, where the show quietly breaks its own rules without ever meaning to. And once those tiny slip-ups are dragged into the light, certain episodes become very hard to ever watch the same way again. Section 2. The mistakes hidden in plain sight. Every cartoon ever made is a gentle trick played on the eyes. A show like this one is not truly moving at all. It is a long stack of still pictures, each one drawn by hand, then shown so quickly, one after another, that the brain smooths them together into what looks like real movement. A single second of a cartoon can be built from many separate drawings. A whole episode can swallow up thousands of them. Each of those pictures is made by a person, and usually by a whole team of people racing against a deadline. When that many drawings are made that fast by that many different hands, small mistakes are certain to slip past. Most of them flash by far too quickly for anyone to catch. A few of them, once someone points them out, are impossible to ever forget. The most famous example of all hides inside one of the show's best-loved early episodes, a third-season story called Missing Identity. In it, the yellow sponge becomes convinced that something about his life has quietly changed, and he spends the entire episode trying to figure out what. The whole joke is that he cannot put his finger on what feels wrong. The strange twist is that the artists, completely by accident, left a real clue sitting on his body the whole time. For the full length of the episode, his shirt is on backwards. The little collar and the seams that should rest behind him are flipped around the wrong way, so the back of his outfit points forward in nearly every shot. He never notices. None of the other characters notice either. The mistake simply stays there, locked into scene after scene, from the opening to the final moment. Once that backwards shirt has been spotted, it cannot be unseen. Anyone who knows about it will spend the rest of the episode watching the wrong spot, staring at a small error the show itself never caught. There is something quietly funny buried in that, because the whole story is built around a feeling that something is off, and the truly off thing is hiding in plain sight on the main character the entire time. That same episode carries a second slip, and this one is even easier to walk right past. There is a wide shot of the sandy road where the three neighbors live. In that shot, the pineapple house stands where it always stands, and the rock that the starfish lives under sits right beside it, just as it should. The stone head house that belongs to the grumpy neighbor, though, is simply gone. The spot where it has stood in hundreds of other scenes is empty, as if the building packed up and wandered off for a single moment before quietly returning. Two real mistakes, both stuffed into one short episode that fans have rewatched and praised for years. Color is another place where these small errors love to creep in. Drawing the same character thousands of times means filling in the same colors over and over again, and every so often, the wrong shade lands in the wrong place. In an episode called Hooky, the sponge wears his usual belt, which is normally a clean, dark color. For a brief stretch, with no reason and no warning, that belt turns a soft brown before flipping back again. A blink and the slip is over. Somewhere else, in a busy scene where a crowd of familiar faces gathers close around the sponge, the young whale, who is the boss's daughter, loses her hat for a beat. With the hat gone, the top of her head goes blank, leaving her looking briefly and completely bald before her hair pops back into place. None of these flickers were meant to be there. Each one is a tiny human fingerprint pressed into a picture that was never supposed to keep it. Objects cause just as much trouble as colors do. In a story called Where's Gary?, the sponge plays with a paddle ball, the kind of toy with a small rubber ball tied to a wooden paddle by a stretchy string. The length of that string refuses to stay still from shot to shot. In one moment, the string is short and the ball hangs close to the paddle. A scene later, with nothing in between to explain it, the string has stretched out far longer than before. Toys, pencils, plates, and props all have a habit of quietly changing size or sliding out of view in this kind of cartoon, because keeping every little item exactly the same across thousands of separate drawings is far harder than it looks. The artists hold most of it together. Now and then, a small thing wriggles loose. Some of the slip-ups are not about clothing or props at all, but about the rules of who a character even is. The sponge is a good example, because the show can never quite decide how strong he is supposed to be. In one of the earliest episodes, called Ripped Pants, he is so weak and worn out that he cannot manage to lift a few marshmallows stuck on the end of a stick. The bar barely moves. Yet in another early episode, the one named Texas, that same sponge grabs a much larger character sneaking up behind him and flips the whole body clean over his shoulder as if it weighed nothing at all. Both versions of him cannot be true at the same time. His strength simply bends to fit whatever the joke of the day happens to need. That is not a single frozen mistake in one picture. It is a slower kind of slip, one that only shows itself when two different episodes are set side by side. None of these errors were ever meant to be found. They were never planned, never written down, and never approved by anyone in charge. They are the natural cost of making a show this big, this quickly. The seasons that fans love the most, the early ones from the first few years, are praised again and again for their sharp jokes and their warm, careful animation. Those very same seasons are stuffed with these little flaws, and that pairing is the whole point. The mistakes did not sneak into the weak episodes. They live right alongside the best work the show ever produced. Proof that even a team doing wonderful work is still a team of people, drawing by hand, hour after hour, doing their best to keep an entire underwater world straight. Drawing a cartoon is slow, tiring work that almost never goes perfectly. A single character has to look the same from the front, the side, and the back, in close-up and from far away, in bright light and in shadow, across countless poses. Every house has to sit in the same spot on the same road every time it appears. Every shirt, belt, hat, and toy has to match what came before. Holding all of that together for thousands of drawings while the clock keeps ticking and the next episode is already due is close to impossible. The surprising thing is not that mistakes happen. The surprising thing is how few of them make it through, given how much had to go right. There is a strange kind of comfort in these flaws, and fans have noticed it for years. Whole groups of viewers spend their time gently hunting for these moments, freezing the screen, pointing at a wandering house or a backwards shirt, and trading the discoveries with one another like little treasures. The hunt is never mean, it comes from love. A mistake in a favorite show is a reminder that the show was made by real hands, not stamped out by a machine. The backwards shirt makes the world feel handmade. The missing house makes it feel warm and a little bit human. Each slip is a soft signal that somewhere, years ago, a tired artist blinked at the wrong second, and that blink got carried all the way to the screen and kept there forever. The town stays cheerful through all of it. The colors stay bright, the music stays light, and the sponge keeps smiling, fully unaware that his shirt is on backwards, or that his strength changes from one week to the next. The errors take nothing away from the fun. If anything, they add a quiet second layer to it, a hidden game tucked under the surface for anyone patient enough to look closely. The show that feels so smooth and so sure of itself is, underneath, a careful patchwork held together by thousands of small choices, with a handful of honest stumbles sewn in among them. Most of these stumbles are exactly that, harmless and small, the kind of thing that can be laughed at and then forgotten. Every one of them can be traced back to a simple cause, a rushed drawing, a wrong color, a prop that drifted, a house left out of a single shot. They are puzzles with plain, gentle answers, and once the answer is known, the mystery quietly closes. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But not every odd thing in the show works that way. Buried among all these easy little slips is one moment that is far harder to explain away, because it does not vanish in a single picture, and it cannot be blamed on a tired hand. The show spent decades carefully refusing to answer one simple question about its own main character. Then, in a quick flash of a small printed card that most viewers never paused to read, it appeared to answer that question by accident, and the answer it gave does not add up at all. Section 3. The birthday that breaks its own rules. Most cartoon characters never have a real age, and that is on purpose. They do not grow up, they do not get wrinkles, and they look exactly the same in their last episode as they did in their first. Asking how old one of them is usually leads nowhere, because the answer was never meant to exist. The yellow sponge was built this way too. For year after year, the show kept his age a soft and friendly blur, never pinning it down, never giving a number. He acts like a small, excited child in one scene, and like a tired, grown worker in the next. And that mix is part of his charm. The people who made the show seemed perfectly happy to leave the whole question floating, with no clear answer at all. Then came one quick moment that cracked the whole thing open, almost by accident. It happens in a first season episode called Sleepy Time. In that story, the sponge discovers he can step into the dreams of the people sleeping around town. He drifts from one dream to the next, popping in on his his friends and neighbors while they sleep, and for a short while, he visits the dream of his boating teacher, the nervous pufferfish. Inside that dream, his boating license appears on the screen. A boating license is simply the card that says a person is allowed to drive a boat, the underwater version of the card that lets people drive cars on land. For a brief beat, that card sits right there in full view, and printed on it is a clear and exact birthday, July 14th, 1986. On that same little card are a few other details that make almost no sense. The license claims the sponge is only about 4 inches tall, which would make him, and every creature around him, a tiny thing barely bigger than a finger. It also lists his hair color as yellow, even though the sponge has no hair at all and never has. The card is silly through and through, the kind of joke prop a show flashes for a second and forgets. The difference is that one piece of that joke, the birthday, accidentally pinned down something the show had spent its whole life refusing to settle. The trouble starts the moment that date is taken seriously. The show first aired in 1999. A character born in 1986 would be around 13 years old when the show began. 13, a young teenager, barely older than a child. Yet this same character lives completely on his own, in his own house, takes care of a pet, holds down a full-time job cooking at a restaurant, pays his own way, and spends his days trying to earn the right to drive. A 13-year-old doing all of that does not fit together. And the boating license makes it stranger still, because in most places, a person has to be around 16 before they are even allowed to learn to drive. A license printed for someone who is only 13 is a card that should not be able to exist in the first place. The show handed its main character a piece of paper that breaks its own rules just by being in his pocket. A simple defense jumps up right away. The first time that birthday appears, it appears inside a dream. Dreams are nonsense by nature. Things float, melt, and twist into shapes that mean nothing once a person wakes up. So perhaps the date on a dream license should not count for anything at all. Perhaps it was just a funny prop that the artists never expected anyone to freeze and study. That answer is reasonable, and for a while, it seems to close the case completely. The case does not stay closed though. The very same birthday turns up a second time in a second season episode called No Free Rides. His boating license appears again in that story, and the date printed on it matches the first one exactly, July 14th, 1986, all over again. This second time, it is no longer buried in some passing dream. The show wrote that birthday down, then wrote it down again, the same way twice. A single odd prop in a dream can be brushed aside as a flicker. The same date showing up twice starts to look less like an accident and more like a quiet fact the show kept on its shelf, even while it pretended not to have one. Behind the scenes, the story of why his age stays so fuzzy turns out to be a real tug of war. The creator of the show wanted the sponge to be a grown-up, a working adult, living his own life, dealing with grown-up things in a goofy way. The network that paid for the show pushed back, because they wanted a younger character, someone closer to the children who would be watching at home. The two sides landed on a clever middle path. The sponge would be an adult, but an adult who was still learning how to drive a boat, which let him feel young and a little helpless without actually being a kid. The teacher with the nervous puff and the boating school she runs were partly born out of that very compromise. The driving lessons gave him a reason to keep failing at something simple, which kept him sweet and small, even while he lived the grown-up life. So the boating school itself, the place where that troublesome license came from, exists in part because two groups of grown-ups could not agree on how old he should be. The creator never gave a straight number, and he seemed to enjoy keeping it that way. At one point, he joked that the sponge is 50 years old, but only in sponge years, whatever that might mean. Another time, he explained the character more plainly, saying the sponge is old enough to live on his own, yet still young enough to be stuck in driving school. That answer settles almost nothing, which appears to have been the goal. A character with no firm age can be whatever a story needs him to be on any given day, childish in one tale and weary and adult in the next, with no rule book to break. Other clues pull hard in the opposite direction from that 1986 birthday. In newer stories, the people around the sponge treat him as a full-grown man. A separate show was made about many of the same characters as young kids at a summer camp, and in that world, the sponge is clearly older than the boss's daughter, the young whale. That daughter is shown elsewhere celebrating her 16th birthday, and the sponge is treated as being roughly 10 years older than she is. Even his own grandmother, in later tales, speaks about him the way a grandparent speaks about a grown grandchild who has long since left home. Lined up together, these hints would place the sponge somewhere in his 20s, a real adult by any measure. So one piece of evidence shouts that he is a young teenager of about 13, while a whole pile of other evidence Lance calmly insists he's a grown man. Both cannot be right, and the show never picks a side. There is a deeper reason the puzzle can never truly be solved, and it sits underneath everything else. The show was never built to happen in order. The episodes do not march along a clear path from a beginning to an end. Story number 2 does not have to come after story number 1 in time, and a tale set in winter can air right next to a tale that ignores it completely. One of the people who has helped run the show for years has openly said the events were never meant to line up on a tidy timeline. That single fact changes how the age question should be read. A character living outside of normal time does not have to age the normal way. He can be 13 in a dream, a grown man at a family visit, and an ageless cartoon sponge the rest of the time, all without any of it being wrong, because the clock in that town does not tick in a straight line the way it does in the real world. So the birthday on that little card ends up being both a mistake and a mystery at the same time. It is a mistake in the sense that it slipped out by accident, a quick prop that was never supposed to be studied, printing a number the show had carefully avoided giving. And it is a mystery in the sense that the number it gave cannot possibly be true, since it points to a 13-year-old who lives alone, works a job, and carries a license he is far too young to hold. The show tried to keep his age a blur on purpose. Its own prop department blew the secret in a single flash. The dream excuse tried to patch the hole, and then the timeline itself swallowed the whole question back up again. The nearest thing to a real answer the show ever offered is a birthday it almost certainly never meant to share, and that birthday makes no sense at all. That is the strange thing about a world this big and this old. The longer a show runs, the more little facts it lets slip without thinking, and some of those facts open doors the makers would probably rather keep shut. A birthday on a license is a small and harmless one. A character being secretly far too young to drive is the kind of slip that ends in a shrug and a smile. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Some of the show's accidental confessions are far less comfortable though. One of them does not live on a tiny card at all. It lives in the most famous food in the whole town, the burger that the entire restaurant is built around, the recipe that one greedy little neighbor has spent the whole show trying to steal. Fans have spent years studying that burger, working out what it might truly be made of, and the answer they keep arriving at is dark enough to change the whole show. Worse still, the boss himself once took a single bite of it and said something out loud that nobody who heard it has ever quite been able to forget. Section 4. What is really inside the Krabby Patty? At the center of the whole show sits a single, small hamburger. The Krabby Patty is the most famous food in the town, the dish that the entire restaurant is built around, the meal that customers line up for day after day. A tiny, sneaky rival who runs the failing restaurant across the street has spent nearly the entire show trying to steal the secret recipe, scheming and plotting and failing over and over again, because owning that recipe would change his whole sad little life. And here's the strange part that fans hold on to. After hundreds of episodes, the show has never once revealed what is truly in that burger. The full recipe stays locked away on purpose, kept secret from the rival, from the cook, and from everyone watching at home. That empty space, that one giant unanswered question, is exactly where the darkest and most popular theory in the entire show began to grow. The theory itself is simple and grim. A large group of fans have come to believe that the Krabby Patty is made out of crab meat. The reason that idea lands so hard is the owner of the restaurant. He is a crab, a walking, talking, money-loving crab with sharp claws and a thick red shell. If the burger named after crabs is truly made of crabs, then the owner has spent his whole life selling the meat of his own kind to a town full of trusting customers. He would be serving up creatures just like himself, and quite possibly creatures from his own family. For a cheerful show made for children, that is about as dark as a guess can get. The first piece of evidence fans point to is the menu itself. Almost every other item the restaurant sells is named after exactly what it is made of. The kelp drink on the menu is made of kelp, the green plant that grows in the sea. The other small dishes follow the same plain pattern, each one named for the thing it contains. So when fans look at that long, honest list and then land on the Krabby Patty, the name suddenly sticks out. If the kelp drink is made of kelp, the simple logic of the menu says the Krabby Patty should be made of crab. The name was sitting in plain view the whole time, doing the same thing every other name on the board was doing. Then there is the question of where all the crabs went. The town at the bottom of the sea is packed with sea creatures of every kind. Fish swim everywhere, in every color and in size. Yet crabs are almost nowhere to be found. The owner of the restaurant seems to be nearly the only crab in the entire town. His mother is a crab, and the two of them stand out as a small, lonely pair. A whole crowd of other crabs did appear once, in an episode where they gathered together, but those crabs were visitors from somewhere far away, not locals who lived in the town. So fans began to ask a chilling little question. In a sea full of fish, why are there barely any crabs around the one restaurant that sells a burger named after crabs? The answer the theory offers is that the crabs keep ending up inside the patties. The restaurant building adds yet another piece. The shape of the place is no ordinary box. It is built to look like a crab trap, the kind of wood and rope cage that people in the real world drop into the ocean to catch crabs. A building shaped like the exact tool used to catch crabs, run by a crab, serving a burger named after crabs, sitting in a town where crabs have nearly vanished, laid out one after another. These details feel less like a string of accidents and more like a pattern hiding in plain sight. None of it proves anything on its own. Stacked together, it makes the theory hard to wave away. And then comes the line. In an episode called Midlife Crustacean, the owner takes a single bite of a Krabby Patty, chews for a moment, and says out loud that so that is what he tastes like. For fans who already believed the theory, that sentence felt like a slip of the tongue, a confession spoken without thinking. A crab tasting a burger and recognizing his own flavor in it sounded like the show quietly admitting the truth, hidden inside a quick joke that most viewers laughed at and forgot. In the real scene, though, that line has a calmer meaning. Just before he takes the bite, a customer in the restaurant complains that the burger is old and dried out, and compares it to the old owner standing right there. The owner, a little stung by being called old and dried out himself, takes a bite to check, and his comment about tasting like himself is a reply to that insult. He is reacting to being compared to the burger. In the grumpy, joking way the character always reacts to things. Read in full, the moment is a joke about an old crab being teased, rather than an admission that crab meat is hiding in the food. The line still fits the theory neatly enough to keep it alive, yet the scene around it points somewhere much more harmless. A second mix-up has fooled even more people, and clearing it up matters. There is a short clip that has spread far and wide online, in which the yellow sponge shouts that the patties are made out of crabs, while the owner panics and grabs him, and horrified customers gasp. That clip looks and sounds like a real scene from the show, and countless people have watched it and walked away certain that the theory was proven true on screen. The clip does not come from the real show at all. It comes from a separate, grown-up sketch comedy show named Robot Chicken, which makes short, silly, often dark jokes about cartoons and characters that people grew up with. The scene was written as a joke by that other show, performed with toy-like figures, poking fun at the very theory fans love. So a piece of evidence that many treat as the smoking gun was actually a parody made by someone else entirely, never a part of the real show for even a single frame. Other episodes of the real show quietly poke big holes in the crab idea. Across different stories, the burger is described as holding ingredients that have nothing to do with crab meat. One episode mentions things like ground up barnacle shavings, flour, sea salt, and a spice for color. Another mentions a seaweed sauce. The recipe that gets hinted at bit by bit sounds far more like a plant and sea stuff burger than a meat one. The second big movie even shows the patty in the real world above the waves, and there it is shown as a plain veggie burger, the kind made without any meat at all. On top of that, careful fans have pointed out something simple and telling. Meat for the patties is never shown arriving at the restaurant. There are no deliveries of crab, no boxes of meat carried in the back door, none of the things a real burger restaurant would need every single day. The supply that the theory depends on is simply never there. The company that makes the show finally stepped in to settle the argument directly. After the theory exploded across the internet, the official account that speaks for the show wrote a public reply, stating that they could fully confirm the burgers are not made of crabs. Plain, clear, and about as official as an answer can get. The creator of the show, while he was alive, and the man who runs the show now, have both said the same thing in their own words. The patties have no meat in them whatsoever. They are vegetarian, which simply means meat-free. By every official word given, the crab theory is wrong. Even after all that, the theory refuses to die, and the reason is the secret recipe itself. The show has chosen, on purpose, to keep the true contents of the Krabby Patty hidden forever. The rival never learns it. The audience never learns it. That choice keeps the most important food in the town wrapped in mystery, and a mystery left open is a mystery fans will fill on their own. As long as the real answer stays locked away, the empty space invites guesses, and the crab guess is the tidiest and most chilling one anybody has come up with. The matching name, the trap-shaped building, the missing crabs, and the bite and comment line all line up just neatly enough that no official denial seems able to fully kill the idea. Fans bring it back every year or two, half as a joke and half as a question they never quite stopped asking. The reason the whole thing matters goes beyond one cartoon burger. The crab theory shows how a sweet, gentle show can grow a long shadow in the minds of the people who love it, simply by leaving one big door unopened. The real owner of the restaurant is greedy, cheap, and obsessed with money, and the show makes plenty of jokes at his expense. A cruel monster who grinds up his own family, though, is a creature the show has clearly told everyone he is not. The honest truth is soft. The burgers are meatless, the recipe stays secret for fun, and the lonely shortage of crabs in town is just the kind of loose end that a busy cartoon never bothered to tie up. Still, the guess is so clean and so dark that it keeps crawling back out of the shadows, year after year, refusing to stay buried. So the famous burger keeps its secret, the owner keeps his money, and the town keeps eating, happy and unbothered, never once stopping to wonder what the menu names might be hinting at. The mystery is harmless in the end. A cook flips the patties, the customers smile, and the rival across the street keeps scheming for a recipe he will never get to read. The darkness lives only in the gap the show left open, and in the busy minds of fans who could not resist filling it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And yet, the food is not the only place fans have gone looking for a hidden darkness. Some have turned their eyes away from the menu and onto the characters themselves, one by one. The claim they make is far bolder than anything about a burger. They say that each of the main friends and neighbors was secretly built to stand for one of the 7 worst things a person can be, a set of dark traits so old and so serious that they have been written about for hundreds of years. According to this idea, the whole cheerful cast is hiding a grim pattern in plain sight, and the people who make the show have been asked about it so many times that they were finally forced to give an answer. Section 5. The 7 Hidden Sins. For hundreds of years, long before this cartoon or any cartoon existed, people have warned each other about a short list of 7 bad ways to live. This list is old, far older than television, and it comes from old religious teaching. The 7 on the list are pride, which means thinking far too highly of yourself; greed, which means always wanting more, especially more money, a strong, hungry kind of wanting that pulls a person toward things they should leave alone; envy, which means being jealous of what other people have; gluttony, which means eating or grabbing far more than anyone could ever need; anger, the hot and bitter kind that takes over; and laziness, the deep refusal to get up and do anything at all. 7 traits, each one a warning. For a very long time, teachers and writers have used this list to talk about the worst sides of human nature. The theory takes that ancient list and lays it right over the cast of the show. The claim is bold and a little chilling. Each of the main characters, the friends and neighbors a whole generation grew up loving, was secretly built to stand for one of those 7 dark traits. Under this idea, the cheerful town at the bottom of the sea is really a hidden picture of everything that can go wrong inside a person, with each sin walking around in a different colorful body. The sweet show that children watched after school becomes, in this reading, a quiet lesson about human weakness, hiding its true meaning behind jokes and bright colors. It is easy to see why the theory caught fire, because each main character really does carry one giant, obvious trait. The owner of the restaurant is obsessed with money in a way that goes past all reason. He hoards it, counts it, sleeps near it, and chooses it over his own workers again and again. Matching him to greed feels almost too simple. The pink starfish spends most of his life lying around, doing as little as possible, napping under his rock and avoiding effort wherever he can. Calling him laziness fits like a glove. The grumpy neighbor with the long nose is bitter and easily angered, snapping at everyone around him, so anger seems made for him. The tiny rival across the street burns with jealousy over the bigger restaurant he can never beat, and jealousy is just another word for envy. The squirrel from the land is proud of her home, her brains, and her skills, which lines her up with pride. The pet snail eats anything and everything in sight, which points toward gluttony, and the sponge himself gets handed the last sin on the list, the strong, wanting one, mostly because every other slot was already filled. Each match seems to click into place, and that smooth clicking is exactly what makes the theory feel true. The characters were drawn with such clear, single traits traits that finding a sin for each one is almost effortless. A pattern that snaps together this easily feels like it must have been built on purpose. That feeling, more than any real proof, is what carried the idea across the internet, shared and reshared millions of times until it became one of the most famous fan theories about any cartoon ever made. There is a second version of the theory, though, and comparing the two reveals the first big crack. Different fans match the sins to different characters. In one popular version, the pet snail is gluttony. In another version, gluttony belongs to the boating teacher, the nervous pufferfish, while the snail is left out completely. In one telling, the strong wanting sin lands on the sponge. In another telling, that same sin is pinned on the boss's teenage daughter, the young whale, instead. The lists do not agree with each other. They shift and swap depending on who is telling the story, with characters sliding from one sin to another, and some characters dropped entirely to make room. And that is the first crack, a deep one, a real hidden plan, something an artist carefully built into a show would not change every time a new person described it. A true secret map would stay the same map. The fact that fans cannot even agree on which character stands for which sin shows what the theory really is. It is a pattern that people found after the fact, then bent and reshaped to fit, rather than a plan that was placed there from the start. When a code has many different answers, and all of them feel about equally good, that is usually a sign there was never a code at all. The people who make the show have answered the question directly more than once, and their answer is clear. The actor who gives the sponge his famous voice was asked about the 7 sins theory in an interview, and he pushed the idea aside, treating it as a fan invention rather than a real plan. A writer on the show, the same person who voices the jealous little rival across the street, spoke about the theory during a reunion. He explained that while each character does have their own strong personality, the link between them and the 7 sins is not as solid as simply pairing each one with a sin on the old list. In other words, the characters were built to be distinct and funny, and any neat match to the ancient sins is something fans laid on top later, not something the show ever planned. The creator himself never built the characters around those sins. There is no proof anywhere that he ever meant to hide a religious message inside the show. The story of how the characters came to be is well known and far more ordinary. He was a scientist who loved the ocean, and he wanted each main character to be a different kind of sea creature with a different kind of personality. A cheerful sponge, a lazy starfish, a grumpy neighbor, a greedy boss. He picked traits that would bounce off each other in funny ways, traits that would create jokes and arguments and warm little moments. The goal was comedy and heart, drawn from his love of the sea, rather than a secret sermon about human weakness. No hidden lesson was ever buried under the laughs. Another problem sinks the theory even deeper. A real symbol of a sin would act like that sin all the time. A character built to be pure greed would never give anything away. A character built to be pure anger would never be kind. Yet the cast breaks their supposed sins constantly. The money-obsessed boss, who is meant to be greed itself, drops everything and spends freely when his daughter needs him because he loves her more than his treasure. The grumpy neighbor, who is meant to be pure anger, has gentle moments, quiet dreams, and real loneliness underneath the snapping. The lazy starfish shows fierce loyalty and even bursts of energy when his best friend is in trouble. The characters are too full, too rounded, too human to be flat little stand-ins for single sins. They each have many sides, and those many sides are exactly what makes people love them. A symbol cannot have a soft heart hiding under its label. These characters do, all of them. So why does the theory refuse to fade, even after the cast and the facts have knocked it down? The answer lies in the way the human mind works. People are pattern finders by nature. A brain will look at clouds and see faces, look at stars and draw shapes, look at random noise and hear words. Give that same brain a cast of characters with strong, simple traits and an old list of 7 dark traits, and it will rush to connect the two, because connecting things feels good. The match between the characters and the sins is real in the sense that the brain truly finds it. The match is not real in the sense that anyone built it on purpose. The theory says far more about how people love to spot hidden meanings than it says about the show itself. In the end, the 7 sins idea is a kind of mirror. Fans looked into a bright, silly cartoon and saw a serious, ancient warning staring back, because that is what their minds were primed to find. The truth is gentler and, in its own way, more interesting. A man who loves sea creatures made a set of funny, flawed, lovable characters. characters, gave each one a clear personality so they would clash in amusing ways, and never once thought about the 7 deadly sins while doing it. The darkness fans found was their own reflection, laid over a show that was only ever trying to make people laugh and feel something warm. The pattern is in the eye, not in the art. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Beyond the sins, there is one more label that has clung to the show for years, and this one settled on the main character alone rather than the whole cast. It became one of the largest and loudest arguments the show ever sparked, a question about who the sponge truly is, repeated so often and so insistently that the creator was finally forced to answer it himself. His answer surprised a lot of people, partly because it leaned on real ocean science, on the strange and simple truth of how a real sea sponge actually lives and grows. Section 6. The question the sponge could not escape. One question has trailed the main character for almost the entire life of the show, louder and more stubborn than any other. It had nothing to do with hidden burgers or backwards shirts or strange birthdays. It was about who the sponge is on the inside, about love and romance, and what kind of heart beats inside that little yellow body. For years, fans asked it, talk shows asked it, and newspapers printed it. The same question came up again and again in interview after interview. Is the sponge gay? The asking grew so loud and so constant that the man who created the show was eventually pulled in to answer it himself. And the answer he gave turned out to be calmer and stranger than most people expected. The closeness between the sponge and his best friend is where it all began. The pink starfish is at his side almost constantly. The two of them hold hands, laugh together, blow bubbles together, and share nearly every adventure the show has to offer. They live just a short walk apart and seem happiest when they are together. To many viewers, a friendship that warm and that constant looked like something more than friendship. People watched two characters who clearly adored each other and read romance into it, deciding that such deep closeness must mean the two were a couple. The friendship was sweet, silly, and endless, and viewers poured their own ideas into it, seeing whatever they were already looking for. In 2005, the quiet debate burst into a loud public fight. The sponge appeared in a music video made by a group that wanted to teach children about kindness, fairness, and accepting people who are different from themselves. The video brought together many beloved cartoon characters to spread a simple message about treating everyone with respect. Some people who disagreed with parts of that message argued that the video and the cheerful sponge inside it were quietly pushing ideas they did not want taught to kids, ideas about who people are allowed to love. All at once, a square yellow cartoon sponge found himself standing in the middle of a serious grown-up argument that was playing out on the news. A character built to make children giggle had somehow become a symbol that adults were fighting over. The creator stepped in to settle things, and he did it plainly. He said the characters were never meant to be gay, and that the whole question had little to do with what the show was actually trying to do. The show was about friendship, silliness, and the joy of small things, not about romance of any kind. Then he offered a deeper answer, one that surprised a lot of people. He explained that he thought of the characters as almost without that part of life at all. Romance, dating, falling in love, none of it was really built into who they were. The word that fits what he described is asexual. An asexual person, or creature, is simply someone who does not feel that kind of romantic or bodily attraction toward anyone. For them, that sort of wanting is just not part of how they are made. The creator felt this fit the sponge far better than any label about being gay or being straight. The sponge, in his eyes, was a creature whose life had no real room for romance in it and never needed any. His next answer makes even deeper sense once the real creature behind the cartoon is understood. A real sea sponge, the actual living thing down in the ocean, does not date, does not pair off, and does not fall in love the way so many animals do. Real sponges often make new sponges in a quiet, simple way that needs no partner at all. A small lump grows on the side of the sponge. That lump swells, takes shape, and eventually breaks away on its own to become a brand new sponge, almost an exact copy of the first one. The grown-up name for this is budding, like a bud growing on a plant and then dropping off to start a new plant of its own. One sponge becomes two, all by itself, with no mate and no romance anywhere in the process. That is simply how the creature lives in the real world. The show itself has leaned into this very fact. At points across its run, the cartoon sponge has been shown making tiny copies of himself, little baby sponges that grow off his body and pop free, exactly the way a real sponge buds in the sea. sea. The show took the strange truth of the actual animal and put it right on screen. So the creator's answer was not pulled from thin air. It grew straight out of real ocean science. The sponge is almost without romance, partly because the real creature he is based on is almost without romance too. A scientist who loved the sea built a character that matched the quiet, partnerless life of the thing it was modeled on, and then answered the world's biggest question about that character by pointing back toward biology. Years later, long after the creator had passed away, the argument flared up one more time. During a month set aside each year to celebrate many different kinds of love and identity, the company that makes the show posted a friendly message online, and that message included the sponge alongside a rainbow. The internet lit up instantly. Many people decided this was the long-awaited proof, the moment the show finally confirmed that the sponge was gay. Phrases declaring it true began trending and spreading everywhere within hours. That message, though, never actually said any such thing. The rainbow it used is a general symbol of welcome and pride, shared across many different groups and identities, not a label stamped onto one specific character. The post celebrated kindness and belonging in a broad way, and it placed no firm description on the sponge at all. So for the second time, nothing was truly confirmed. People looked at a warm, colorful picture and saw in it exactly what they had hoped to see or feared to see, just as they had done with the closeness of two cartoon friends years before. The picture was a friendly wave to everyone, and the meaning poured into it came mostly from the people reading it. The clearest answer ever given still belongs to the creator himself. He said, "The characters are almost asexual, and that they were never built to be gay." That answer holds up from every direction. It matches the real creature, a sponge that lives and multiplies without any partner. It matches the heart of the show, which has always cared about friendship, jellyfishing, and the simple happiness of a good day far more than it has ever cared about romance. And it matches how the sponge actually behaves on screen year after year. His days are filled with his best friend, his pet snail, his job flipping patties, and his deep love of catching jellyfish and blowing bubbles. Romance almost never crosses his mind because it was never placed there to begin with. He is too busy being delighted by small, ordinary wonders to spend any time on it. So the long argument that chased the sponge for decades ends in a place that is gentle and surprisingly clear. A cartoon meant only to be sweet and funny ended up at the center of one of the longest debates about identity in all of television, simply because two friends loved each other openly and without shame. The truth the creator left behind is clean and calm. The sponge was never a flag to wave in anyone's fight. He is a cheerful little creature whose heart overflows with friendship rather than romance, built to mirror a real animal that lives the same quiet, loving, partnerless way down in a real tide pool. The endless asking revealed far more about how viewers search for love and meaning in everything they watch, even in a square yellow sponge, than it ever revealed about the sponge himself. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Beyond the sponge and his own simple makeup, there is one family in the show whose makeup makes no sense at all. And this time, the creator did the opposite of explaining. A greedy crab, hard-shelled and small, somehow has a daughter who is an enormous whale, towering over him, looking nothing like him in any way. The creator received letters for years asking how this could possibly be, fans begging for some answer that would make the family tree add up. And rather than clearing it up the way he cleared up the question about the sponge, he dug in his heels and refused, on purpose, to ever solve the mystery of how a crab came to raise a whale. Section 7. The crab who raised a whale. Inside the home of the greedy little restaurant owner sits one of the strangest facts in the entire show, and the show treats it as the most ordinary thing in the world. The owner is a crab, small, red, hard-shelled, and so tiny he could nearly fit in a person's hand. He has a daughter, and his daughter is a whale. Not a baby whale, and not a small one. She is a huge teenage sperm whale, soft and pale, towering high above her father so that he barely reaches her ankle. The two of them live together as father and daughter under one roof, sharing meals, sharing a home, sharing a life. He worries about her, spoils her, and loves her dearly. And in all the years the show has run, across hundreds of episodes, not a single character has ever stopped to point out that a tiny crab somehow has an enormous whale for a child. In the real world, a crab and a whale are about as far apart as two living things can possibly be. A whale is a mammal, which is the same large family of animals that includes dogs, horses, and people. A whale is warm-blooded. It breathes air through lungs, the same way a person does, which is why real whales rise to the surface of the sea and blow out a spray before diving back down. A mother whale gives birth to a live baby, not an egg, and she feeds that baby milk from her own body. Whales are clever, social, and among the largest creatures that have ever lived on Earth. A crab, by contrast, is nothing like that at all. A crab is a small, shelled creature with jointed legs and sharp claws, the kind of animal that scuttles sideways along the sea floor. A crab does not have lungs the way a whale does. A crab does not give birth to live young and feed them milk. A crab lays eggs, often many thousands of them at once, and the tiny crabs that hatch are left to fend for themselves. A crab and a whale belong to two completely different corners of the animal world, so far apart that the idea of one being the parent of the other is impossible in every real sense. A crab can no more father a whale than a beetle could father an elephant. The two simply do not connect. The most obvious way out of this puzzle is adoption, and it is the first answer many fans reach for. Perhaps the crab found a lost or orphaned baby whale and chose to raise her as his own, loving her completely even though she carried none of his blood. That would turn the whole strange family into a warm story about chosen love, about a parent and child who belong together by heart rather than by birth. It is a gentle, satisfying idea, and it would smooth the puzzle right over. The trouble is that the show never once treats Pearl as adopted. It calls her his daughter, plainly and constantly, with no hint that she came from anywhere but his own family. So the kind adoption guess, lovely as it is, runs straight against the way the show itself talks about the two of them. On the screen, the show is sure about several things, even while it dodges the big one. Pearl is the crab's daughter, stated again and again. She is a teenager, with a teenager's moods, crushes, and worries. She lives with her father in their home, a hollow old anchor resting on the sea floor. She sometimes works at his restaurant, much to his delight, since it means free help. And in the small details, the show even remembers that she is a real kind of whale. Because whales breathe air, Pearl needs air too, and one episode shows her holding air inside her nose so she can manage underwater. In another episode, her crab father is shown teaching her how to leap up toward the surface to breathe, the way real whales rise and break the water. That image alone is wonderfully odd, a little crab giving a giant whale lessons on how to be a whale, since a crab would have no idea how any of that works. Through all of it, across every single episode, the show never explains how a crab came to have a whale for a daughter. The gap is left open wide, on purpose, and no character ever wanders near it. The real reason behind all this turns out to be plain, and a little ordinary, the kind of answer that quietly lets the air out of every wild theory. The creator wanted each main character in the show to be a different kind of sea creature: a sponge for the hero, a starfish for his best friend, a crab for the boss, a squirrel from the land, a grumpy octopus next door, a tiny one-celled rival across the street, and a whale. Pearl was made a whale for the simplest reason imaginable, so that the cast would have a whale in it. She was one of the very first characters the creator ever dreamed up, sitting near the top of his earliest list of who would fill this underwater world. He thought of her during a time in his life when he worked a job watching whales out on the water, helping visitors learn about these giant animals, back before he made cartoons for a living. So Pearl being a whale grew straight out of his real love of whales, and his wish to pack the show with as many different ocean animals as he could fit. The mismatch with her tiny crab father was just the funny price of that choice, and the creator was perfectly happy to let it stand without ever explaining it. There is one piece of this family that the creator guarded far more carefully, and he guarded it on purpose for the whole life of the show. The question is simple: who was Pearl's mother? If the crab is truly her father by blood, then somewhere there must have been a mother, and the kind of mother she was would explain why Pearl is a whale. An official book about the show, written by one of its early writers, offers a single small clue. The book says that Pearl takes after her mother. Those few words quietly point toward an answer. If Pearl takes after her mother, and Pearl is a whale, then her mother was almost certainly a whale too. The book even gives that mother a name, the family name, and describes her as a whale. That one line gently tells fans that Pearl is most likely the real blood-born daughter of a crab father and a whale mother, rather than an adopted child taken in from elsewhere. An official book may name the mother, yet the show itself never does. Where that whale mother is now, what happened to her, whether she is gone or simply absent, and how a crab and a whale ever became a couple in the first place, none of it is ever told. The mother appears in no episode. She has no face, no voice, and no story on screen. For years, the creator received letters letters from fans begging him to reveal her, to finally explain the strangest family in the whole town. He could have answered easily. He chose not to. One of the people who helped run the show has said that the creator was strongly against ever solving the mystery of the mother, and he held to that choice until the very end of his life. The blank where Pearl's mother should be is not a thing the show forgot to fill in. It is a blank the creator placed there on purpose and refused to remove, no matter how many people asked. Back when the show was only an idea on paper, before a single episode had ever been drawn, this odd father and daughter pair already existed exactly as they are now. In the earliest written plans, the crab and his whale daughter were going to live a traveling life, moving from place to place together in a kind of rolling home, complete with a trailer large enough to hold a whale. That traveling idea was dropped before the show began, and the two were settled instead into the hollow anchor they still call home. The detail that matters is how early it all came together. The whale daughter of a crab was not a strange accident that crept in over time. She was built into the heart of the show from the very first sketches, planned from the start, an impossible family that the creator wanted there before the world ever saw a single frame. A more careful or more serious show might feel a need to explain such an impossible family, to give viewers some reason that makes the bloodline add up. This show never bothers, and the reason fits everything else about it. The town at the bottom of the sea runs on silliness and warmth, not on careful rules about how nature works. Wondering how a crab fathered a whale is a bit like wondering how a sponge can hold down a job, or how a squirrel can live underwater in a glass dome. The show simply does not care to answer, and it quietly trusts that the people watching will not truly care either. What the show wants is for the bond between the two of them to feel real, and it does. The crab frets over his daughter, brags about her, and would give up almost anything to keep her happy, including, on rare and shocking occasions, his beloved money. That love is the whole point. The matching of their bodies, the science of how such a pair could ever share blood, is brushed aside as something that does not matter next to the feeling. The bond between them carries the strangeness with ease. A tiny crab and a giant whale, sitting together in a home shaped like an anchor, behaving like any father and teenage daughter anywhere. They argue, they make up, he embarrasses her, she rolls her eyes at him. He sacrifices for her when it counts. None of that needs a clean family tree to land. The warmth does all the work, and the warmth is so plain and so steady that most viewers spend years watching the two of them without the impossible part ever crossing their minds. The love makes the puzzle invisible, which is exactly what the creators seem to want. So the oddest family in the whole town turns out to be held together by two things, and neither of them is biology. The first is love, the simple, stubborn affection between a father and his daughter that needs no explanation to be felt. The second is a creator who happened to love whales, who wanted one in his cast, and who decided that a small unsolved mystery was worth far more than a tidy answer. The crab raises his towering daughter, teaches her things a crab could never really teach a whale, and never once tells anyone where she came from. The only clue ever offered, that she takes after a whale mother, points to a mother who is never seen. The real reason underneath it all is just that the creator wanted a whale and refused to spoil the small mystery by clearing it up. A puzzle with a soft and loving heart at its center, left open on purpose forever. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the crab teaching his whale daughter how to rise and breathe at the surface is one of those quiet moments where the show bends the rules of the real ocean without so much as a blink. That kind of bending runs through the entire town, far past one strange family. Every single day, the residents of the seafloor do something together that should be completely impossible down there beneath the waves. Something so basic and so common that most viewers have watched it happen 1,000 times without ever once stopping to ask how it could possibly work underwater at all. Section 8. The fire that should not burn. Deep beneath the waves, on the sandy floor of the sea, a small campfire crackles in the dark. Two friends sit beside it, holding sticks with marshmallows on the ends, leaning in close to roast them over the flames. The fire pops and glows, throwing warm orange light across their faces, sending little sparks drifting up into the water. They laugh, tell stories, and warm their hands, perfectly cozy, perfectly content. It is one of the most ordinary scenes the show ever puts on screen, the kind of thing viewers have watched 100 times without a second thought, and it is completely, utterly impossible. Fire, in the real world, lives by a few simple rules, and those rules almost never bend. A fire needs three things to exist. It needs something to burn, like wood or paper. It needs heat to get going and to keep going. And most of all, it needs air, because fire feeds on a gas in the air called oxygen, the way a living thing feeds on food. Take away any one of those three things, and the fire dies at once. Water is so deadly to fire because it takes away two of them in a single moment. Water blocks the air, cutting off the oxygen the flame needs to breathe, and water soaks up the heat, dragging the temperature down until the fire cannot survive. That is the whole reason people pour water on a campfire when they want it out. A bucket of water ends a fire in seconds. So a fire sitting at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded on every side by water, would not flicker and struggle. It would be gone instantly, drowned the very second it tried to light. There is no clever trick that lets an open flame burn underwater. It is one of the firmest, most unbreakable rules in all of nature. Yet the town at the bottom of the sea runs on fire from morning to night, as if the rule had never been written. The fire is not hidden in the background either. It sits front and center, doing work that real fire does, all day long, deep below the surface, where no flame could last even a heartbeat. The restaurant at the heart of the show is the clearest example of all. The famous burgers are cooked on a hot grill, sizzling over heat, sometimes with flames licking up around them. A cook stands at that grill for entire episodes, flipping patties over an open fire that should not be able to exist down there. Kitchens across the town hold stoves that blaze and burners that glow. The whole business that the show is built around, the making and selling of a hot cooked burger, depends on a kind of fire that the ocean would put out in an instant. Nobody behind the counter ever wonders how the grill stays lit underwater. They just keep cooking. In one camping story, the sponge and his best friend set up a campsite right there on the seafloor and build a roaring campfire, exactly like the kind people build on dry land high above. They sit around it, they sing, they roast food over it. The grumpy neighbor joins them, against his will, and even he never once asks how a campfire could be burning at the bottom of the sea. The fire behaves like any fire anywhere, warm and bright and crackling, throwing shadows into the dark water around them. Candles burn in the show too. Lanterns glow, matches are struck and catch flame. There are even explosions, big bright bursts of fire, blooming underwater where no spark should ever survive. Each one breaks the same basic rule, over and over, without the show pausing for even a moment to notice. The man who built this world knew, better than almost anyone making cartoons, that none of it should be possible. He was a real ocean scientist before he ever drew a single frame. He had studied the sea, taught others about it, and spent years close to the water and the creatures in it. He understood exactly how fire works, exactly how water works, and exactly what happens when the two meet. The impossibility of a campfire on the sea floor would have been as obvious to him as anything could be. So the breaking of the rule was never a mistake born of ignorance. It was a choice made on purpose, with full knowledge, again and again across hundreds of episodes. A scientist who knew the truth chose to ignore it every single time for the sake of fun. There is an unspoken rule that holds the whole trick together, and once it is noticed, it explains everything. The show allows fire underwater, but only on one quiet condition. No character is ever allowed to point it out. The flames can burn, the grills can sizzle, and the campfires can crackle, just as long as nobody on screen ever stops and says, "How is this fire even burning down here?" The instant a character broke that silence and asked the question out loud, the whole spell would shatter. The audience would suddenly remember that none of this makes sense. The cozy warmth of the scene would curdle into confusion, and the joke would collapse. So the characters never ask. They roast their food, warm their hands, light their candles, and carry on as though everything is perfectly normal. The magic survives only because every single resident of the town agrees, without ever saying so, to never notice the thing that should be impossible. The moment of silence is the real secret. A lesser show might try to explain the underwater fire, inventing some special kind of flame or some made-up reason it works. This show is wiser than that. It knows that any explanation would only draw attention to the problem and make it worse. Far better to say nothing at all, to let the fire burn without comment, and to trust that the warmth and the fun will carry the scene right past the part of the brain that knows better. By refusing to explain, the show keeps the impossible thing feeling natural. The less it is mentioned, the more invisible it becomes. Strangely, this enormous broken rule bothers almost no one, not even grown-up viewers who understand fire and water perfectly well. The reason is that the show set up its own world from the very first minute and told everyone watching right away that the usual rules do not apply here. A sponge talks. A sponge lives inside a pineapple. A sponge holds a steady job, drives a boat, and keeps a pet snail that meows like a cat. By the time a campfire appears on the sea floor, the viewer has already agreed to believe a dozen impossible things, and one more barely registers. The mind has already stepped through the door into a place where anything can happen, so a flame underwater feels like just another small wonder rather than a giant mistake. Belief, once given, stretches easily to cover the fire too, and fire is only the loudest member of a whole family of impossible things the show does underwater without blinking. A character can pour a tall glass of water, lift it to their lips, and drink it while standing in the middle of the ocean, taking a sip of water inside the water. The beach is another fine puzzle. The town has a place to go for fun in the sun, a stretch of sand beside a body of water called Goo Lagoon, where the residents lie out on towels, build sandcastles, and swim in the water there, even though the entire town is already deep underwater. There is even a lifeguard watching over that beach, ready to save anyone who might drown, which raises a wonderful question all on its own, since every creature there is already living at the bottom of the sea. Their boats are stranger still. The vehicles in the show are called boats, yet they behave exactly like cars on land, rolling along roads, stopping at traffic lights, honking, crashing, and sitting stuck in traffic jams, despite the fact that real boats are built to float on top of water rather than drive along the ground beneath it. Weather happens too, with skies and clouds and the occasional storm, all somehow appearing down where there should be nothing but dark water in every direction. Weather, beaches, water to drink, cars that are somehow boats, and fire that somehow burns. All of it stacked together in one cheerful town that never pauses to question any of it. The show keeps 1,000 tiny impossibilities running at the same time, quietly and constantly, and it holds them all in the air with the same simple trick. Nobody points them out. The world agrees to believe in itself, and so the viewer does too. A show built on careful realism, on getting every detail right, would crack and crumble under the weight of all this. Such a show would have to stop every few minutes to explain how the fire burns, and why the boats drive, and where the weather comes from, and all that explaining would suck the life and the speed right out of it. This show was built on the opposite idea, on a foundation of pure imagination, where the only rule that truly matters is whether something is funny or whether it makes the audience feel something. If a campfire makes a scene cozy, then the campfire burns, and no law of nature is allowed to get in the way. That freedom is a huge part of why the show feels so alive and so endless. It never has to slow down. It never has to apologize. It can reach for whatever the moment needs and grab it without a second thought. The freedom to ignore reality is the engine under the whole show, and the underwater fire is the clearest, brightest sign of that freedom at work. The creator handed himself permission to set aside the rules of the real world whenever the story called for it, and the campfire glowing on the sea floor is what that permission looks like when it lands on the screen. Every flame is a small declaration that this world plays by its own rules, that logic comes second to joy, and that the people watching are invited to let go of what they know and simply enjoy the warmth. There is something almost admirable in how steady the show stays about it. One rule gets broken constantly in nearly every episode, yet a second rule, the rule of silence, is kept with near perfect discipline. Hundreds of episodes, thousands of scenes, countless fires, and still no character ever turns to another and asks the obvious question. That kind of consistency takes real care. The writers had to remember every time to let the fire burn and to never let anyone notice. The breaking of the first rule only works because the second rule is held so faithfully. A show that breaks the laws of nature in plain view and yet never once lets the secret slip is a show that knows exactly what it is doing. So the most broken rule in the entire show turns out to be the one that bothers people the least. A fire that should drown the instant it is lit instead crackles away happily on the floor of the sea, warming a sponge and a starfish who would never dream of questioning it. It is impossible. It is everywhere. And it is one of the purest examples of how the whole show thinks. Choose warmth over logic. Choose the laugh over the law. Choose the feeling of a cozy campfire under the stars, even when there are no stars, only dark water, and trust the audience to lean in close and enjoy the glow without ever asking how it could be real. The fire keeps burning because everyone, on screen and at home, quietly agrees to let it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The town bent and broke all sorts of rules of nature for decades and got away with every one of them, fire and all, without a single complaint that ever truly stuck. There were were a small handful of rules, though, that the people in charge could not let slide. A couple of episodes crossed a line that had nothing to do with fire or water or science. A line about what is and is not all right to show to children. When that line was crossed, the response was swift and quiet. Those episodes were pulled out of sight, taken off the air, and locked away, with one of them shut so far behind closed doors that it may never be shown again. Section 9. The episodes that were locked away. The town got away with breaking the rules of nature for decades. Fire burned underwater, boats drove like cars, and not one complaint ever truly stuck. There is another kind of rule, though, one that has nothing to do with science or logic, and it turned out to be far less forgiving. It is the rule about what is and is not all right to show to children. The show pushed against that rule often, slipping in jokes and moments that were a little more grown up than people expected from a cartoon about a sponge. Most of the time, those moments sailed right past. Twice, they did not. 2 episodes crossed a line that the people in charge could not let stand, and both were quietly taken off the air and shut away from view. Across the years, the show built a reputation for being cleverer and a touch edgier than other cartoons made for kids. Grown-ups watched it just as happily as children did, partly because the writers tucked in little jokes aimed over the heads of the youngest viewers, jokes that only older people would fully catch. That balance was part of the show's charm. A child could enjoy the silly surface, while an adult chuckled at something hidden just underneath. For the most part, the show walked that line with skill, never tipping too far in either direction. But a show that runs for hundreds of episodes is bound to step over the edge eventually, and when it did, the results were 2 episodes that the network decided the world was better off not seeing. None of this double meaning happened by accident. The writers were skilled at building 2 layers into a single scene, a bright and goofy top layer for young children, and a quieter, sharper layer underneath for the grown-ups watching alongside them. A joke could be read one way by a small child, and another way by a parent on the couch, and both could laugh at the same moment for completely different reasons. That clever trick is one of the reasons the show held on to its older fans for so long. It also meant the writers were always working close to a line, reaching for humor that was just grown up enough to delight adults, without quite tipping into something a child should never see. Walking that close to the edge for that many years, a misstep was bound to come sooner or later. What stands out most, looking back, is how rare these removals really are. The show has produced hundreds upon hundreds of episodes across more than 20 years, and only 2 of them were ever locked away. Given how often the writers reached for grown-up humor, how many jokes brushed right up against the edge of what a kids show could do, that small number is a kind of quiet proof of how carefully the line was usually walked. Thousands of scenes, countless sly jokes, and yet only 2 crossings serious enough to undo. Most shows that take that many chances would stumble far more often. This one, for all its daring, kept its footing nearly every single time. That restraint is easy to miss, mainly because the 2 failures are the parts people end up remembering. The first of the 2 is an episode from the 3rd season that aired in early 2003. On its surface, it is a warm and gentle story about getting older. The greedy restaurant owner is feeling his age. He looks in the mirror, sees an old crab staring back, and falls into a glum mood about the years slipping away from him. He overhears the sponge and the starfish making plans for a fun night out, and a wish stirs in him to feel young again, to join in and recapture some of the excitement of being a kid. It is a sweet and very human idea, the kind of feeling almost anyone can understand. An old man wanting one more taste of his younger days is the soft heart at the center of the whole story. The mood the old crab falls into has a common name in the real world. People sometimes call it a midlife crisis. It tends to strike a person somewhere in the middle of their life, when the years behind them suddenly feel longer than the years still ahead, and a quiet panic sets in. A person caught in that feeling often tries to grab their youth back, chasing the kind of fun and freedom they remember from their younger days. The episode takes that very real and very human ache and hands it to a small, grumpy crab, which is part of what makes the story so easy to understand. Almost everyone has either felt that pull themselves or watched an older person feel it. The story begins kindly enough, with the old crab tagging along on the sponge and the starfish's idea of a wild evening. The joke, at first, is how tame their version of wild really is. To the 2 friends, a thrilling night means childish, harmless fun, the sort of things that delight a small child and bore a grown adult. They do simple, goofy activities, the kind that make the old crab roll his eyes and grumble at first, certain that none of it is the excitement he was hoping for. The episode plays this gap for laughs. The gloomy old crab dragged along on a night of innocent silliness, slowly starting to enjoy himself despite his complaints. minutes. For most of its length, it is a soft and pleasant little story about an old soul learning to loosen up. The trouble comes near the end, in a single scene that changed the fate of the whole episode. As the night goes on, the group takes part in one activity that finally gives the old crab the thrill he had been chasing. They break into a woman's home and steal her underwear. The whole idea is built on an old prank from many decades ago, a prank that was treated as mischievous fun in films and stories from a much earlier time. The episode frames it as the daring, naughty adventure the old crab had been craving all night, the thing that at last makes him feel young and alive again. There is even a twist at the end of it, played for a laugh, when the woman whose home they broke into turns out to be the old crab's own mother. She is not amused in the slightest. She scolds him like a child and sends him straight to his room, flipping the whole night on its head and ending the story with the supposedly grown old crab being treated like the little boy he had been acting like all along. For 15 years, that episode aired without much fuss. It ran on television, showed up in reruns, and sat quietly in the lineup alongside every other episode, watched by millions of children and adults over more than a decade. Nobody in charge seemed to think twice about it for a very long time. It was simply one episode among hundreds, a slightly odd one perhaps, but nothing that raised any alarm. A whole generation grew up having seen it, probably more than once, without anyone deciding it needed to go. Then, in 2018, that changed. The network took another look at the episode as part of a review of its older shows, a fresh check of whether everything still met the standards the company wanted to keep. After that review, the decision was made to pull the episode completely. A spokesperson for the network explained the choice plainly, saying the episode had been taken out of rotation because, after the review, some parts of the story were judged to be not appropriate for children. The network did not spell out exactly which parts, but nearly everyone understood the reason. The scene of breaking into a home to steal a woman's underwear, framed as a fun and daring thrill, no longer sat well in a show meant for kids. What had passed as a cheeky joke for 15 years was now seen through different eyes, and through those eyes, it could not stay. A standards review is simpler than it sounds. Every so often, a company that owns a huge library of old shows will go back through them with fresh eyes, checking whether the older material still matches what the company is comfortable putting in front of children today. Shows made many years ago were written under the ideas of their own time, and ideas about what is suitable for kids keep shifting from one decade to the next. So a careful company looks again, story by story, and decides whether anything ought to be trimmed, edited, or removed. Most of the time, almost everything passes without a problem. Now and then, a single scene stands out as no longer acceptable, and a choice has to be made about the whole episode that holds it. Part of why this review happened when it did has to do with how people had started watching television. By that point, more and more families were watching shows through streaming services, the kind where every episode sits in a giant library, ready to be played at any time with a single tap. That meant old episodes were no longer buried in the random shuffle of cable reruns at odd hours. They were suddenly easy to find, search for, and play whenever anyone wished, sitting right there next to the newest episodes, as if they had all been made yesterday. An old scene that might once have slipped by quietly was now available to any child, anytime, with no warning at all. That new kind of easy access is part of what pushed the company to look harder at what its library actually held. The network treated the matter with quiet seriousness, rather than loud announcement. There was no big public statement, no apology, no drama. The episode simply disappeared. It vanished from the channels, and it was pulled from the streaming services where people had been able to watch it, taken off the platforms one by one, until it could no longer be found in the usual places. A whole episode of a beloved show was lifted out of the lineup and set aside, removed so smoothly that many fans did not even notice it was gone until they went looking for it and could not find it. After it was pulled, the episode became a kind of ghost. It was still real, still finished, still sitting somewhere in the company's files, yet it had no home where the public could easily see it. It did remain available in a few corners. Copies on home media and older collections still held it, and it could be bought as part of a larger bundle of episodes through certain stores online. So it was never destroyed or erased entirely. It was simply pushed out of the easy, everyday places where people watched their favorite shows, made into something a person had to hunt for, rather than something that played on its own in the normal rotation. There is an odd twist to pulling something from view. The very act of hiding an episode can make people want it more. Once word spread that the episode had been taken away, curiosity about it grew and grew. Fans who might never have given that one story a second thought, suddenly went searching for it, eager to see the very thing they had been told they could no longer have. A quiet, half-forgotten episode became, almost overnight, one of the most talked about stories in the whole show, simply because it had been locked behind a door. The hiding made it famous, which is close to the opposite of what hiding is supposed to do. In 2023, the episode briefly reappeared, and the way it came back is almost funny. Through a technical slip-up on one of the streaming services, the episode was accidentally posted again for a short while, popping back into view where it was never supposed to be. For a brief moment, fans could watch it once more, as if it had quietly returned from exile. The mistake did not last. As soon as the error was caught, the episode was taken down again, swept back out of sight just as quickly as it had appeared. That short, accidental return only proved how firmly the network meant to keep it hidden. The episode stands today as the one episode of the entire show considered to be permanently set aside, with no plans to ever bring it back into regular view. Of all the hundreds of stories the show has told, this single one carries the unusual mark of being shut away for good. The second episode that was locked away has a very different story behind it, and the reason it was pulled had nothing to do with anything improper inside it at all. This one comes from a much later point in the show's long run. The story centers on a sickness spreading through the town. A contagious illness called the clam flu begins to pass from creature to creature around the sea floor, and the famous restaurant ends up sealed off and placed under quarantine, which simply means shut away to keep the sickness from spreading further. The whole plot is built around a disease moving through a community and the panic and trouble that follow. As a piece of cartoon storytelling, there was nothing wrong with it. It was a normal episode with a normal sort of premise, finished and ready to air like any other. Quarantine is an old idea that became a part of everyday speech during those years. To quarantine means to keep a sick person, or a whole place where sickness has spread, separated away from everyone else, so the illness cannot jump to new people. Long before the cartoon was ever written, doctors and towns had used the practice to slow down dangerous diseases. During the real worldwide sickness, the word was suddenly everywhere, in the news every single night and in nearly every conversation. Children were kept home from school, shops and restaurants closed their doors, families went weeks and months without seeing the people they loved most. So an episode that turned quarantine into a punchline, with a restaurant sealed off over a silly made-up flu, would have dropped into homes where quarantine had become a real, tiring, and frightening part of daily life. The timing is what doomed it. The episode was set to be shown around 2020, the very stretch of time when a real and serious sickness was sweeping across the entire world. A true global illness had arrived, one that touched nearly every country and changed daily life for almost everyone on the planet. Hospitals filled, people stayed home, and the whole world grew tense and frightened. A light-hearted cartoon about a made-up disease spreading through a town, complete with a quarantine, suddenly looked very different against that backdrop. A storyline that would have seemed perfectly harmless in an ordinary year now risked striking far too close to a painful reality that millions of families were living through. The network chose to hold the episode back rather than air it into all that fear and grief. A spokesperson explained the decision in simple terms, saying that because the episode centered on a virus storyline, the company had decided not to show it out of respect for the sensitivities surrounding the real, worldwide sickness. The choice was about kindness and timing, rather than about anything shameful in the episode itself. Putting a jokey tale about a spreading illness on the air, while real people were terrified of a real one, felt wrong, so the episode was quietly shelved and held in waiting until a better moment came. 2 years later, that better moment finally arrived. By 2022, the world had moved further along, and the worst of the fear had begun to ease. Other shows were starting to fold the experience of the pandemic into their own stories, and enough time had passed that a cartoon about a made-up clam flu no longer landed as a fresh wound. So the held-back episode was at last allowed to air, finding its way onto the screen after its long wait in the wings. Once it finally aired, viewers could see for themselves that it was a perfectly ordinary, even gentle little episode, which proved the pause had only ever been about timing. Unlike the first episode, which remains locked away with no plans to return, this second one came back into the light once the moment was kinder. Its exile was always meant to be temporary, a pause rather than a permanent goodbye. So the two episodes that were pulled were taken away for reasons that could hardly be more different from each other. One was judged to have something inside it that did not belong in a children's show, a scene that 15 years of reruns had carried along until fresh eyes finally decided it had to go. That one was pulled for what it contained, and it has stayed gone. The other held nothing improper at all, only the bad luck of arriving at the exact wrong moment in history, when its harmless plot would have echoed a real and painful event far too closely. That one was pulled for its timing, and once the timing healed, it was welcomed back. A judgment about content sits on one side, and a judgment about the moment sits on the other. There is a quiet lesson buried in the tale of these two episodes, and it has to do with how the world changes around the things we make. A show can outlive its own moments. Standards shift as the years pass, and what once seemed like a harmless joke can come to look like something that crosses a line, even if not a single frame of it ever changed. The episode about the underwater break-in did not become different over 15 years. The world around it did. People's sense of what is okay to show children moved, slowly and quietly, until the same old scene was simply read in a brand new way. And an episode can be ambushed by events no one could have predicted, like a finished cartoon about a fake disease running headlong into a real one. The makers of the show did nothing wrong in either case. They simply got caught in the way time and the wider world keep reshaping the meaning of what was already made. It is a strange thing to realize that a finished piece of art is never fully finished, in a sense, because the world keeps walking around it and changing the light it is seen in. The same scene, frozen forever in place, can mean one thing to one generation and something quite different to the next. Nothing inside the episode moves, yet its meaning drifts, carried along by the slow tide of changing minds. A cartoon made for one moment in time has to go on living in every moment that comes after it, and not every later moment will judge it the same gentle way. Both of those episodes were real, completed, and pulled by the very people who made the show, for reasons that anyone can read about openly. There were public statements, clear explanations, and honest accounts of what happened and why. Nothing about them is hidden or mysterious, even though fans built plenty of talk and rumor around them. The reason was always stated, the episodes always still existed, and anyone curious enough could learn exactly what had occurred. They are simply two stories that the network decided, for two very different reasons, the world was better off not seeing, at least for a while. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. There is one more lost episode tied to this show though, and it is unlike the other two in every way imaginable. This one was never made by the people behind the show at all. It has been whispered about in the darkest corners of the internet for years, passed from person to person in hushed, frightened tones. The story goes that somewhere there exists a secret episode so disturbing, so deeply wrong, that it was never meant to be seen by anyone. An episode that supposedly shows something far more horrifying than any break-in or any made-up flu. It is a tale built not on files and statements, but on fear, rumor, and the dark imagination of strangers online. The truth of where that story truly came from, what is real about it, and what is pure invention, is the strangest tale of all. Section 10. The Lost Episode That Never Was. Among all the strange stories tied to the show, one stands far apart from the rest. It is the darkest of them all, the most whispered about, and the only one that the show itself never had any hand in making. For more than a decade, it has drifted through the shadowy corners of the internet, passed quietly from person to person, in the kind of hushed voice people use for ghost stories. The tale speaks of a secret episode, a lost and cursed one, so deeply disturbing that it was supposedly never allowed to reach a single television screen. Unlike the two real episodes that were pulled by the network for clear and public reasons, this one was never pulled, never aired, and never even made. And yet, for years, a great many people half believed it was real. To understand the legend, it helps to understand the kind of story it is. The internet has its own special breed of scary tale, a sort of modern ghost story written and shared by ordinary people online. These stories are crafted to feel real. They often pretend to be true accounts, written by someone who claims to have seen or lived through something frightening, dressed up with little details that make them sound believable. They spread the way a whisper spreads in a quiet room, copied and pasted from one website to the next, growing stronger and more convincing with every retelling. A tale like this is a campfire ghost story built for the glow of a screen instead of the glow of a fire. Many of the most famous ones take something cozy and beloved, a cherished cartoon or a favorite game, and twist it into something wrong. These tales even have their own well-known shapes, and the one the lost episode belongs to is among the most popular of all. People call it the lost episode kind of story. The idea is always more or less the same. A beloved old show, the kind a person watched as a small child, is said to have one secret episode that was too disturbing, too broken, or too cursed to ever be shown. Someone claims to have found it, or seen it, or been handed a strange tape of it, and what they describe is always a twisted version of the cheerful thing the audience remembers. The reason this shape works so well is simple. Almost everyone has a show they loved as a child, a warm and safe place in their memory. A lost episode story sneaks in and poisons that safe place, hinting that the comfort was never quite as pure as it seemed. That quiet attack on a happy memory is what makes these stories crawl under the skin and stay there. There is a special kind of fear that only works on things people once trusted. A scary movie about a haunted forest keeps its horror at arm's length because few people share a deep, tender bond with a forest. A scary story about a cartoon watched every morning over breakfast reaches somewhere much closer to the heart. It takes a thing wrapped in good feelings, in lazy weekend mornings and warm childhood afternoons, and whispers that something rotten was always hiding underneath. The closer a story can creep to something a person loves and trusts, the deeper its fear can sink. That is exactly why so many of these lost episode tales fasten themselves onto gentle childhood shows, rather than onto things that are already dark and frightening. The gentler the target, the sharper the scare, and few targets are gentler than a sunny cartoon about a sponge. The story is told from the point of view of a person who claims to have worked as a young helper at the studio where the show is made. According to the tale, this helper and a few others were gathered one day to watch the footage of what was meant to be the opening episode of a new season before it went out to the public. At first, it seemed ordinary. Then, slowly, something began to feel wrong. The grumpy neighbor, normally a source of comedy, was shown unusually quiet and unusually sad. The colors in the episode looked dim and off. The longer the footage played, the heavier and darker it became, with strange sounds layered underneath that nobody in the room remembered adding. The tone slid further and further from anything the cheerful show would ever do, and the episode ended in the worst possible way, with the grumpy neighbor coming to a dark and tragic end of his own. The story claims that when one of the lead artists slowed the footage down to study it, frightening images flickered between the normal frames, hidden pictures that had no business being there. The room, the tale says, fell into a horrified silence. Out of that single story came one picture that nearly everyone online has seen at least once, even people who never read a word of the tale itself. The picture shows the grumpy neighbor staring straight ahead, his eyes glowing a deep and unnatural red, ringed by heavy dark circles, his whole face looking hollow and haunted and wrong. That image became the face of the entire legend. It was shared endlessly, pasted into jokes, slipped into other scary stories, and used to frighten people across the internet for well over 10 years. For many, that red-eyed picture is the only piece of the legend they know, a single haunting image floating free of the story that birthed it. The red-eyed picture took on a life entirely of its own, drifting far from the story that made it. People who had never read a single line of the tale still recognized that hollow, glowing-eyed face. It turned up as a sudden scare in other videos, as a joke between friends, as a little dare passed around to unsettle someone late at night. An image can travel faster and further than the words that birthed it because a picture needs no reading and no patience. A single glance delivers the whole chill at once. So while the written story stayed in its corners, the face spread everywhere, becoming one of the most recognizable scary images the internet has ever produced, known by millions who could not have told where it came from or what it was supposed to mean. The reason the tale took such a strong hold is the same reason every good scary story works. It took something warm, safe, and deeply familiar, a sunny cartoon watched by millions of small children, and quietly suggested that something terrible was hiding inside it. The contrast is the whole trick. A monster lurking in a haunted house is exactly what anyone would expect to find there, so it frightens far less. A horror hiding inside a bright show about a sponge is the last thing anyone expects, and that surprise is what gives the legend its grip on the mind. The story leaned hard on its details, too. The talk of studio helpers and lead artists, the careful description of a viewing room, the slow build of dread, all of it was shaped to sound like an honest confession from someone who had truly been there, rather than a tale spun from thin air. None of it is real. Not one frame of that cursed episode ever existed. existed. The entire thing is a piece of internet horror fiction, invented out of nothing and posted by an anonymous person on a message board in the spring of 2010. There was never a secret episode. There were never any horrified helpers gathered in a dark room. There was never any hidden footage, never any flickering images, never any tragic ending sitting on a reel somewhere in a studio vault. The story was typed out by a single person who wanted to frighten strangers on the internet, and it worked far better and spread far wider than that person could ever have imagined. The place where the story was first posted matters to how it grew. It began on a kind of website where people share messages without ever giving their names. An anonymous board where posts appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. On a board like that, there is no author to question and no name to check. A frightening story simply appears, unsigned, as if it had floated up from the dark on its own. That facelessness made the tale feel even more real, because there was no obvious storyteller standing behind it, taking credit or asking to be believed. From that nameless beginning, the story was copied outward onto bigger and brighter websites, then onto video sites, then into the everyday talk of fans, each step carrying it further from its quiet, anonymous birth and closer to feeling like a piece of shared history that had always been around. A few years after the story first appeared, the truth was settled by the one person who knew it best. In 2013, a writer came forward on a discussion website and stated plainly that he was the one who had created the tale. He explained that the whole thing was simply a piece of fiction, a scary story he had written and shared with no truth behind it whatsoever. The frightening legend that had haunted so many people turned out to have an author, an ordinary person sitting at a keyboard, dreaming up a tale to unsettle a few readers. There was no haunted studio, no cursed tape, no dark secret. There was only a storyteller and a blank page, and a story that grew far beyond what its maker ever planned. For all its frightening power, the timeline of the legend is short and very human. It began on a single day in the spring of 2010, one anonymous post among countless others. Within months, copies and rival versions had begun to appear. Within a few years, the original writer had quietly stepped forward to admit the whole thing was his invention. And not long after that, the videos and the famous picture had spread so far that the truth could barely keep up with them. A lie can circle the world while the correction is still tying its shoes. So even though the story was explained and confessed within a handful of years, the legend kept right on growing for far longer, carried along by people who had heard the scary part, but never once heard the ending. Part of the reason the legend felt so large and so old is that it did not stay a single story for long. Not long after the first tale appeared, other people online began writing their own versions of it, fresh tales that borrowed the same basic idea and added new twists and new horrors of their own. One of these copies grew almost as famous as the very first story, and as the years passed, countless people mixed the two up entirely, coming to believe that the later copy was actually the original. So the legend was never one clean tale at all. It was a small, tangled family of stories, each one written by a different hand, each one pretending to describe the same impossible, cursed episode. That tangle of copies made the whole thing feel older, deeper, and more real than it ever truly was, as though many witnesses were describing one true event, rather than many writers inventing the same lie. The way the copies multiplied is worth pausing on, because it shows how these stories really live. A good scary tale on the internet is never owned by anyone for long. The moment it catches on, other writers take the idea and run with it, building their own versions, adding fresh details, inventing sequels and side stories and rival accounts. Each new version quietly borrows the weight of the ones before it, so the whole pile grows heavier and more believable together than any single story could ever be alone. Readers who stumble across the fourth or fifth version often assume they are reading about a well-recorded event, simply because so many separate accounts seem to agree with one another. The agreement is an illusion. It comes from writers copying writers, not from witnesses describing a real thing. A crowd of fake accounts can look exactly like a crowd of true ones, and that is precisely how a single lie grows into a towering legend. Alongside the written tales came videos. Clips began to circulate online, each one claiming to be the actual lost episode, finally recovered and revealed. These videos were stitched together from pieces of perfectly ordinary, real episodes of the show, chopped apart, darkened, slowed down, and drained of their color, with eerie noises laid over the top to set the mood. Anyone Anyone who watched closely could spot the seams. Familiar scenes had been pulled out of place and edited to look strange and threatening, the cheerful animation twisted by simple tricks rather than by any real curse. The footage proved nothing at all, because it was nothing more than normal cartoon clips wearing a costume of shadow and static. The very evidence that was meant to prove the legend true was itself just one more layer of the fiction, made by fans with editing tools and a love of a good scare. The fake videos deserve a closer look too, because they fooled even more people than the written tales did. Words on a screen ask the reader to imagine the horror for themselves. A video seems to hand it over directly, which feels far harder to doubt. Yet every one of those clips was made with the same simple tools anyone might use to trim a home movie. Real scenes were darkened until the colors turned sickly. Frames were slowed until friendly motions looked stiff and unnatural and wrong. Harsh grinding sounds were laid underneath to set the nerves on edge. None of it required a curse or a secret tape. It required only patience and a willingness to twist something cheerful into something grim. For viewers who did not know how easily such tricks are done, the results looked like solid proof. For anyone who did know, the seams showed plainly, and the spell fell apart at once. The whole strange tale says a great deal about how people share fear, and about how the internet can take a tiny seed and grow it into something that feels ancient and certain. One made-up post, written by one anonymous person on a single afternoon, spread until millions had heard some version of it, and a large share of those people came to half believe in a cursed episode that had never existed for even a moment. A story, copied and retold enough times, can begin to feel like a shared memory, as if everyone had always known it, as if it had simply always been true. People who could not say where they first heard it would still swear they had seen the red-eyed picture somewhere long ago. That slow drift from invention into something that feels like fact is the real power behind the legend, and it has nothing to do with ghosts or curses at all. It is simply the strange way that fear travels and grows when it is passed from screen to screen. A curious thing about these legends is that knowing the truth rarely makes people stop enjoying them. Even after a story is fully explained, even after its author has confessed and its tricks have been laid bare, people keep telling it, keep sharing the picture, keep passing the chill along. The fear becomes a game everyone agrees to play, a shiver chosen on purpose rather than one forced upon them. There is a strange comfort in a scare that can be switched off the moment it goes too far, a horror with a known ending and a safe exit nearby. So the legend lives on, not because anyone still believes it, but because pretending to believe it just for a moment is fun. The story survives as a kind of toy rather than a threat, handed down for the simple pleasure of a safe and shared shiver in the dark. There is a gentle, almost funny ending to the whole saga. Years after the legend first took hold, the show itself did something that quietly put a cap on it. In a more recent episode, the people who make the show slipped in a small, knowing wink at the very legend that had once frightened so many of its fans. A quick little nod to that famous red-eyed picture, tucked into the show on purpose for sharp-eyed viewers to catch. The show could only make a joke like that because, by now, nearly everyone understands the legend for exactly what it is, a harmless piece of internet folklore with no truth behind it. The very thing that once spread fear through a generation of fans had softened into a friendly inside joke, acknowledged with a smile by the same show it had supposedly haunted. The cursed episode, in the end, became a wink and nothing more. So the darkest tale tied to the cheerful town turns out to be the one with the least truth in it of all. The real place with the heavy past was real. The backward shirt and the vanishing house were real. The impossible birthday on the boating license was real, printed right there on the screen. The locked away episodes were real, pulled by real people for reasons anyone can read. But the cursed lost episode, the one whispered about in the dark for more than a decade, was never anything but a story, made up by a stranger and grown enormous by the simple act of retelling. It frightened people precisely because it pretended so well to be true, and it crumbles the moment its true beginning is known. There is a kind of comfort in reaching the bottom of that particular mystery. The scariest story attached to the show is the one that dissolves most completely under a calm and steady look. No tape sits cursed in a vault. No hidden horror waits between the frames of a real episode. There is only a clever piece of fiction, an anonymous writer who later owned up to it, a pile of copycat tales, and a stack of fan-made videos built from ordinary clips. Once those plain facts are lined up in a row, the fear has nowhere left to hide, and the red-eyed picture becomes what it always was, a piece of art made to unsettle, no more haunted than a drawing scribbled on a piece of paper. paper. Looking back across the whole journey, a clear pattern shines through all of these tales. The show sits on top of a real and serious history, the work of a real scientist who loved the sea, and on top of that solid ground grew a towering tangle of guesses, jokes, mistakes, and inventions. Some of the strange things about the show are true and provable, frozen right there in the animation or printed plainly in the records. Backwards clothing, a birthday that breaks its own rules, episodes quietly removed, a crab raising a whale. Others are pure imagination, dreamed up by fans who looked at a sunny cartoon and could not resist filling its quiet spaces with meaning, with darkness, with secrets the show never actually held. The burger made of crab. The 7 hidden sins. The creatures born of nuclear fire. The cursed lost episode. Each of those grew not from the show itself, but from the busy, pattern-loving minds of the people who loved it. It helps to sit for a moment with how different these two kinds of secrets really are. The true ones are quiet and a little ordinary. A tired artist drew a shirt the wrong way around. A prop card slipped out a birthday nobody meant to share. A network looked again at an old scene and decided it had to go. These truths do not shock so much as they gently surprise. The small, honest fingerprints of real people making a real show under real pressure. The invented ones are loud and thrilling by comparison. A cannibal crab, a town of nuclear monsters, a cursed and bloody lost episode. They are far more exciting than the truth, which is exactly why they spread so much faster and stick so much harder. The plain facts ask only to be noticed. The wild theories beg to be repeated. And in the long memory of the internet, the thing that gets repeated is the thing that survives, which is why the inventions often end up louder and better known than the modest truths they grew from. That mix of the real and the invented is what keeps a show like this one alive long after most cartoons are forgotten. A show that gave easy answers to everything would leave nothing for anyone to wonder about. This one kept its recipe secret, left its strangest family unexplained, never settled its hero's true age, and let 1,000 tiny mistakes slip quietly into its frames. Every gap it left behind became an invitation, a small open door through which fans could step and imagine. Some of what they imagined turned out to be true. Most of it did not. All of it, true or false, became part of the strange and sprawling world that grew up around a simple sponge in a pineapple, a world far larger and far deeper than the cheerful surface ever let on. None of it, in the end, takes anything away from the show. A cartoon strong enough to hold this many theories, this many mysteries, and this many invented horrors is a cartoon that clearly meant something to a great many people. Stories only grow around the things that matter. Nobody bothers to dream up a cursed episode for a show that no one cares about. The sheer size of the tangle, the whole mountain of guesses and jokes and legends, is itself a quiet measure of how deeply the little yellow sponge worked his way into the hearts of those who grew up with him. The theories are a strange form of love. They are what happens when a simple, cheerful thing is watched so closely and held so dearly that its fans cannot help but keep finding new depths in it, even depths that were never really there. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.